So, okay.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm Judy Pollock. I'm the president of Chicago Audubon, also a longtime member of Chicago Ornithological Society and big supporter. So I guess I'm here as a partner and a member, which is nice. I was glad that Edward gave the partnerships a little shout out, because I do think that that's one of the great features of the Chicago birding community these days is all the great partnerships that are going on. Um, so we're going to talk a little bit about the bird-friendly building ordinance, and I'm going to start it off, and then Carl Giametti and Claire Halpin are going to talk a little bit about bird-friendly buildings towards the end. I just wanted to start by acknowledging all the people who are a part of the Bird Friendly Chicago Committee. It's a collaboration between 4 different groups: COS, CAS, the Chicago Bird Collision Monitors, and Annette Prince is the leader of the group, and then the Illinois Ornithological Society. And I think that, and I think Carl would probably agree, that it's been a really effective group. We've had a lot of people with a lot of different skills, and people have really been able to step up and contribute in their area. And it's all really come together to be quite a successful effort. So it's something that I've really enjoyed working on a lot. And this is our website. It's birdfriendlychicago.org. But I'm gonna stop screen sharing now so that we can go to the PowerPoint, which Carl is gonna bring up. So, and then what I'll be talking about is kind of why it's important, why this is important for Chicago, and a little bit about the status of where we are right now. I like that Edward said that it was a success already. We're in the final stages, but I don't think we can really check that box yet as a success, which I will explain. So there you can see who our presenters are going to be today. And this is a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So why is Chicago important for birds? You may remember that recently Cornell came out with this study where they took a look at 2 different things. One is where are all the birds, and the other thing is where are all the lights. And when you put those 2 things together, and you can see by looking on this little chart on the side here, you can see spring migration and fall migration. The lighter colors are where the greatest numbers of birds are. And Chicago is, quite close to this big mass of birds that's coming up from Central and South America through the middle of the country. And then if you look at that bottom chart, you see that Chicago has got a lot of light that it's emitting. And when you combine those 2 things together, Chicago winds up being the most dangerous city, spring migration and fall migration. So, Chicago was the first city in the US to do a lights out program. There's a reason for that. We have a big problem, and we've known it for a long time. This is from our website, which Dan Laurie did, really nice job. And this is a billion birds nationwide. You see all kinds of different estimates. Some are more in the hundreds of thousands, but lots of birds being killed every year. And if we just take a look at this one, 26,000 dead birds have been found in the loop between 2005 and 2014. That's from the Chicago Bird Collision Monitors. And these birds are for just one day, just, in a few blocks during a few hours on September 30th. So if you just multiply that out, you know that we've got an enormous problem here. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new. So yeah, what do we do about it? So we got this committee together. We wrote up an ordinance and started trying to put it through. Right away, we got a great response from Alderman Brian Hopkins, who was really been our key sponsor and has helped us to put this through. I think Deborah Shore has been sort of working behind the scenes to help us get access to many of the public figures that we needed to talk to. And we had the ordinance all written up. went to committee, fine. It almost got through before Rahm Emanuel left office, but it just didn't. You know, that last meeting, it just didn't make it onto the agenda. And in the meantime, you know, we've been having a lot, we had lots and lots and lots of meetings with lots of people, including the building department, the planning department. And we were hearing from people that it would be hard to figure out exactly which of those departments would be the one to enforce our ordinance, because it had some different pieces in it. At the same time, when the new mayor came in, um, this was just, she really runs the council agendas with kind of an iron hand. And we couldn't figure out how to get it onto her radar screen so that she would, you know, push the committee to bring this forward. So a decision was kind of made that the better way to try to get it through, rather than to push the ordinance through, would be to go for this, to get it included in the sustainability checklist. And so that's this, okay, you see the Chicago Department of Planning, Sustainable Development Policy. So when this is what it looks like. It's a checklist, and certain buildings have to fill it out. I'll explain which ones in a minute. But if you look over to the end there, you'll see that there's a couple of bird-friendly building provisions here. One is a 5.1 and one is a 10.1. Now, right now, these points are all optional, and the buildings can pick and choose, and there aren't a lot of them that are picking the bird-friendly one. But what did get passed was an ordinance saying that this bird-friendly section was going to be mandatory. It was no longer going to be optional, and it was going to be stiffened a little bit. So where we are right now is we are meeting with the Department of Planning and Development to develop exactly what the nuts and bolts of this requirement are. What does the language actually, is that the language going to say? So, you know, we're pretty much there. The ordinance is passed. The ordinance says that it has to be mandatory and it has to be a little stiffer, but it doesn't say exactly how. And so at this point, Carl and I are both on the committee where we're going to be meeting. I don't know, is it tomorrow? We're meeting very soon.
Tomorrow at 3.
Yeah. So we should have hopefully some good news on this really soon. But, you know, we've been saying that for years, really. So, okay. So where would the policy apply? It would apply in a few zones, not all the zones, but downtown, the river, near big parks. I think the name for them is legacy parks, the lakefront. Those are some of the key zones where it would apply. And I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and then Carl put this great slide together to show that the policy applies. You have to fill out this checklist if you are a certain kind of building. For example, a plan development, or I think there's another slide that shows what it is. But you see, this is like an area of the loop, and this shows all of these different kinds of buildings that have to fill out this this checklist. So basically, if you want to ask the city for any kind of a favor, they tell you that you got to do the sustainability checklist. So it applies to larger buildings. It does not apply to you know, 1, 2, and 3-story residential buildings. Yeah. So again, just looking at an area of the loop. You know, these little.
Yeah, it's real quick, Judy. Yeah, so this is an area of Humboldt Park. And so, yeah, if you kind of start looking at the zoning designations, which is tied to, you know, there are some PDs out here that it would apply to. But, you know, a lot of these R zones aren't, you know, that you see here, it would not apply to. And this is by Humboldt Park, actually, you know, kind of one of their legacy parks. And so, you know, the goal would be to get some of these buildings that border the park as well to for it to apply to. And one thing I guess to mention too, this is for new projects. So, you know, people would not be forced into renovating, you know, by this. This is for basically new buildings and major additions.
Yeah. So, so here's what we're trying to make sure that this this checklist says that people have to do. That either they have to have a bird collision threat rating of 15 or less, and that this has to cover 95% of the facade up to 60 feet above grade, and then higher than that, 60% of the facade. And it also includes 95% of the facade above green roofs, roof gardens, and landscape amenity decks. And I'll tell you what that threat rating is. Yeah, so here's like sort of a picture where you can kind of see how that works. There's these two different zones here. The green is the zone 1. You see there's a little green up here too. And zone 1 is a stiffer standard. And then there's the zone 2. And if you look over here, you can see, for example, clear glass has a threat factor of 100, which is the highest. And then coming down here, the opaque glass has a threat factor of 0, which is the lowest. And then there's all kinds of ranges in between here. And American Bird Conservancy is the one that, that rates these. And here's an example of some of the rating. And so this is a formula where you plug in and it basically is guiding you towards types of glass that are more bird friendly. And I think Carl and Claire will talk a little bit more about that. If the glass, the material that you use does not have that threat rating, we sort of list out some other ways that are bird friendly and that you can use.
And Judy, I know this is a lot of words for people. Do we have this or policy on our website?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we do.
Yeah, so if people
Yeah.
want to dive in and actually look at the details on this, you can check that out at birdfriendlychicago.org.
Yeah, right. And so then again, we address lighting and exterior features like pools and fountains and ventilation grates that are often problematic for birds. Okay, so yeah, so I think that's about it. And then I'm going to turn it over to Carl and Claire.
Yeah, so some of the next steps, real quick here, for Bird Friendly Chicago is, as Judy said, it's a policy right now, which, it's a departmental policy. It's enforced like, like it's a rule. Everyone has to go through it, but it still is not a law. It's not compelled by the city ordinances like other items are. So that's really the end goal of Bird Friendly Chicago, is to turn the policy into law. And then also to apply the measures to a broader category of projects. So right now it's only applying to those that Judy talked about. We'd like for that to apply to a broader scale. So those are really the next steps for Bird Friendly Chicago. But as Judy said, one thing that Claire and I are going to touch on here is what makes buildings dangerous. Our best asset in this push for bird friendly buildings is to have people educated, so that way when a building is going up in your neighborhood or in your suburb, and if you go to a planned development meeting or something like that, is you know what to ask for and what to look for. And a lot of these too, we talk a lot about commercial buildings, but all these things apply to your own house too as well. So I'm just going to go through a few aspects of buildings that make buildings dangerous, and then Claire is going to highlight some buildings that really creatively implemented bird-friendly building practices. So, in the end, if I could sum it down to one word, what makes buildings dangerous? It's glass. The more glass that's on a building, the more dangerous a building is. And why is that? Well, it reflects trees and reflects skies, and it creates a mirror-like effect. And kind of the cynical people would be like, "Oh, why don't birds learn to see reflections?" Well, the nasty secret is humans can't see reflections either. But because we learn symbols that identify where glass is, we know, oh, I see a mullion, I see some framing around this glass, therefore I know that reflection is not real. Well, obviously birds aren't able to learn those symbols that humans are, and so they have a difficult time distinguishing that. And so you look at large glass facades like this, where you can see there's a couple of birds that at the time this photo was taken that were killed by reflections here, because to them this just looks like a piece of blue sky that they can fly into. And the other difficult thing about it is that at some points glass looks like, oh, there's obstructions in it, and you can kind of see through it, and it's like, oh, there's no way you can confuse that for just a reflection. But at different times, depending on the position of the light, like this one lower right hand corner, it can become highly reflective. The other thing too that is just devastating is interior landscaping, because again, birds don't see the mullions on the side that tell them that there's a piece of glass in here. and so they see this tree as a possible perching point, and they will, try to fly right into it. Again, other areas, see-through corners here, is that if you did not know that these mullions held glass, you could see right through and see a tree here. So a bird is going to try to cut through this column here and run right into this piece of glass. I think this is at Illinois Center in the just along Michigan Avenue there. And so, you should be kind of getting the pattern now, is that, these glass links or elevated walkways where someone just sees right through there. A bird thinks that they can fly there. Now this one, they did incorporate some frits, although, the fritting is a little bit too invisible to see there. And Claire's going to touch on kind of the spacing rules. One thing that's absolutely just lethal are glass railings, because again, they're usually outside. They're often surrounding planted decks, planted patios and things like that. Balconies in the city of Chicago where people have plants on them. And so birds think they can just fly right through. And especially, you don't have to be even a human will sometimes walk into these things not seeing the frame. So obviously a bird has no chance. And then, again, lights, birds are attracted to lights, as we all know, like moths and mosquitoes and insects are. They have the same reaction. So when we have lights at night and early morning, birds are attracted to that. And unfortunately, it's often bringing them into the most dangerous environment for them to exist. So that's where initiatives like Dark Sky Chicago are really important. But what makes the building bird safe? And so I'll turn this over to Claire here, who can touch on some projects and features of these projects.
Sure, yeah. And the solutions, I think, the first step to a solution, the first step to designing a building that's bird safe is kind of looking at all those problems that we just looked at and trying to assess and avoid them in the first place. And the second, sorry, my cat is in the background. And the solutions are really most effective if they're thought about at the beginning of a project and they're integrated into the design. So they're actually helping reinforce the architecture, not working against it. And the other thing that's an element here and with the ordinance too is just that retrofits are usually more expensive. Whereas if these measures are thought about at the beginning and as part of the design, they're really not, they don't have to be that expensive. They can be kind of built into the budget, and it just kind of makes them more likely to be incorporated. So yeah, part of the toolkit, and maybe go to the next slide, there's sort of a series of things that you can do with the glass that's left once you've kind of assessed and avoided as much as possible any of those problem solutions. But of course, in buildings and in architecture, there are a lot of reasons why you want to have glass and you want to have transparency. There are a lot of sustainability reasons why you want to have those things, natural daylight and kind of passive heating and things like that. And so there are a few things you can do to the glass. One of the sort of simplest things and most well-known ones is putting a pattern on the glass, like a frit or an etch it's called, which is basically a permanent, it's either baked onto the glass or it's permanently kind of chemically etched into the glass. And so that means it's not something that's stuck on, which, people often put decals or patterns, adhesive things on glass as a retrofit, which is, a decent solution if you have a problem, but it's not necessarily a permanent solution. And this is an example of a building I worked on when I was at Studio Gang, where we got the frit included in the project, in the construction, in the design. And it's also just really important that it's on the outside face of glass, which is, I mention it just because it's actually hard to find glass manufacturers who will do that, but it's really important to make it effective. Because as Carl showed in some of those images where at different times of day, if you get a reflection, if the outside of the glass is smooth, like if the pattern is not on the outside of a piece of glass, then it might not work. So that's one of the key kind of mitigating things. Here's another one, which is a product that has been coming out in the past few decades by glass makers directly to solve this problem. There's a company in Germany and a few American ones are starting to make it too, which is to incorporate this UV treatment. And it's a really interesting way of solving the problem because the spectrum at which the pattern is on the glass means that it's much more visible to birds than it is to the human eye. So in a place like this, so this is a project in Highland Park, it's on the lake, it's on Lake Michigan, and it's glass on 4 sides, and the intention here is to see the lake, and especially so many of these buildings that are in kind of nature centers or in natural areas are just the kind of the perfect collision of where you want to be able to see outside and connect people to nature, but it's also one of these places where there are a lot of bird strikes because the building is in nature. So this is a great solution. As you can see, you can't really see any pattern here, but this glass all has a pattern that birds can see and that will show them that that's a solid wall and so they won't fly through it. And the next one is, can you go to the next? Yeah. So another solution is screening the glass. And this is an example of a museum building. It's in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park. It's called the DeYoung Museum. And this is a building where seeing outside is not necessary, but having some natural light and having it diffused is really important. So the screen is actually a perfect solution here because it's an actual physical barrier in front of the glass, which is very effective for preventing bird strikes. And it also does a second thing, which is that it solves another problem for the building, which is it cuts down the glare and so that you're not getting direct sunlight in a museum space, but you are getting filtered light. And so I really like these solutions that solve the bird strike issue and also solve another problem for the building because it just means that it's that more robust of a solution. So this is a good one for that. And yeah, I guess, and then there's some other details that have to do with how you design those things. Like one of the key ones is the 2x4 rule, which is just a rule of thumb for how to space the openings and when it's effective and when it's not. So for example, if you're using horizontal or vertical lines as your screen or as a pattern on the glass, if they're vertical, they can be spaced farther apart, and that's because most birds are, because the wingspan would prevent them from flying through, so they won't go for that sort of narrow vertical space. However, because they have more agility going up and down and they can kind of go through horizontal spaces a little bit more easily, those need to be closer together. And I think that's the last slide, but yeah, I'll just say that I think that the best solutions are the ones that kind of solve multiple aspects of the problem and reinforce the architecture.
And I think, I'm so glad you showed the one project in Kalamazoo, because I think there's a lot of a perception that, the only bird safe building is one that has no glass. And I like to, jokingly show a slide of a data center on Congress, or I guess it's Ida B. Wells now, where it's just basically a concrete monolith. That's not what we mean when we say bird safe. And, as Claire has shown that, if we get bird safe building, into ordinances or into architects' consciousness, they can find solutions that, don't just solve the problem of bird safe building, but can often solve other things. And, it can be quite beautiful, when it's given the proper attention and effort. So, yeah, at this point, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left before we need to go back and join the session. Thank you, Judy and Claire, for doing a presentation here. And if anyone has any questions, You can throw it in the chat, or there's I think enough of us here that if you want to just unmute and ask it as well, Claire, Judy, or I would be happy to answer any questions folks have.
And can I just jump in while people are thinking of their questions? I just want to acknowledge in this group, we also have Chris Mikulek, who is one of our committee members, and also Amanda Ziegler, who we worked with on getting an important presentation set up. So we got a ton of help along the way with this. It was really a great group effort.
And Judy, maybe actually I have a question for you, leading. If folks are interested in getting involved in the Bird Friendly Chicago effort, what would you recommend?
So on our website, we do have a section where you can fill out, particularly, let us know if you live in the city, what ward you live in. But we do have a little section you can fill out and let us know what you're interested in. You don't have to live in the city. And we do send periodic updates to people who have signed up on our website. At this point, it might just be coming to the party, but I do feel like, after we make it to this one point that we were working so hard to get to, as Carl said, we do have other goals of trying to make this a law, and also just this law is for new construction, but what about all the existing buildings? I think we need to start thinking about them. How can we encourage them to do retrofits? How can we encourage homeowners? It's a big area for us to take on. But right now we're trying to get to this next step. But yeah, we would love to have you sign up on the website.
Claire, we got a question from Scott Judd. Has bird safety made its way into architectural education curriculums?
That's a great question. I don't know, but I think it should be. And I think one thing, I think we should try to make an effort to make that happen. And another thing that I've thought of as a strategy to kind of get more awareness among architects, which is totally increasing in the past decade or so, but architects in general have to have these continuing education credits, and they have to do that, every year or so, depending on where your license is, to kind of renew. You have to keep learning things. And so a lot of architects are always looking for ways to get those credits, and having some that are available on this topic might be one way of getting practicing architects more aware. And I think, Carl, do you already do one like that? You have a presentation.
Yeah, Judy, Ted Wolf, and myself have actually given presentations to a variety of groups offering some continuing education credits. We've talked to construction specifiers. And so certainly, yeah, I don't think, to Scott's question, I don't really think it's made its way into architectural schools, but this is definitely something firms are aware of, and they're looking to learn more. It is difficult because it does affect, the facade, which is something that I think a lot of architects hold personal to them. That is, usually where, design is often expressed. And it's just one small issue. So, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think, like Claire said, in the past decade, it's certainly something that I think every architect you come across now is aware of. Whether or not they have all the facts and are armed with the strategies to mitigate it, is something that we're still developing. And certainly if we get it to a point where it's required, architects are required by the nature of their profession to know building codes and ordinances. So yeah, we've actually prepared with Cornell a little bit, but actually the most active person in this is the American Bird Conservancy. They really have been the main driver when it comes to bird safe buildings, and they are wonderful partners, and they're fearless, and they've been a huge help to Bird Friendly Chicago in terms of providing the science for this, and just the experience that New York City underwent when they passed their ordinance.
Yeah, I think they actually have, doesn't ABC have a tunnel testing?
They do, yep.
So that and I think that's really exciting, because if there are new materials, like one of the slides showed how clear glass is a threat level of 100 and an opaque wall is a threat level of 0. But there are all these, when, like the buildings that I've worked on where we do a custom pattern, you don't really know what the threat level is of some of these things. You know, it's probably better, but to actually be able to kind of put metrics and science behind some of these things is really important.
Judy, Gwendolyn asked a question. Any updates on the state level bill for bird safe buildings? I think you're a little bit more in tune than I am on that.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about that. And I think honestly that the language in the state level bill was a little weak. And so it's something that I personally haven't been following much because I don't have high hopes for it. I mean, you know, it's something and but I think its value is a little more symbolic than I don't think it's, you know, it allows you to kind of wiggle out of the requirements. So I think it's not going to do much for birds other than maybe open some doors. I did want to answer Amy's question as long as I'm speaking. She said, "Are any of you on the advisory councils for Lincoln Yards or the 78?" Yeah, so Lincoln Yards, you know, right on the river, and all of their pictures look horrible for birds, but we have been working with Alderman Hopkins, who, as you know, is the big champion for Lincoln Yards. And he has assured us that any construction in Lincoln Yards is going to be bird friendly. He said that he was able to get that agreement from them. The 78 is one we haven't started on. And, you know, there's a bunch of big things going up. So I think maybe the next time our committee gets together, we need to be thinking about, you know, how do we make some progress with some of these other large developments. And I think now that we have some pretty good connections with different city departments, hopefully we can make some headway with that.
Well, thank you everyone for joining our breakout. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording here, and it looks like we're being shepherded back to that. So please, you know, feel free to follow up with us if you have any other questions.